Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am really excited to welcome Karen Fabian. She is a yoga teacher, author, podcast host, and founder of Bare Bones Yoga. With a background in rehabilitative medicine and over 20 years of teaching, she blends anatomy and movement into yoga education that's practical, clear, and empowering. Her signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, helps yoga teachers around the world lead confidently using clear cues, strong sequencing, and a deep understanding of why their instruction matters. Karen is the author of Stretched and Structure, and she hosts the Conversations with Yoga Teachers podcast, where she dives into anatomy, cueing, and the business of yoga alongside inspiring guest experts. Karen, so glad that you are here today. Welcome to you and your, for those of you who are watching, skeleton friend.
Yes, I call him Mr. Bones.
Mr. Bones. Welcome, Karen and Mr. Bones, to the show.
Yes, maybe this is the first time you've had a Mr. Bones on your show as a guest.
Yeah, I think it is. I think this is the first time I have had a skeleton along for the ride, but that's great because it's always really helpful to have that kind of visual reference when we're talking about anatomy. So I'm glad that Mr. Bones is here.
Cool. He won't say too much. I'll refer him. But thank you for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
That's great. All right. Well, Karen, let's start at the beginning. Who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
Life introduced me to this version because I went to a yoga class in 1999 and it literally transformed my vision for what I wanted to do with my life. Up until that point, I'd worked in healthcare. I started out thinking I wanted to be a physical therapist, and I went to school for that. And then I ended up getting my undergrad degree in rehab counseling, and I worked as a social worker. I loved working in hospitals with people with different types of medical issues and helping them get home and get set up at home with the services they needed. And I went from that type of work to working on the business side of healthcare. And I thought that was pretty much what I wanted to do. And then I went to a yoga class in 9, and I thought, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing. I had never taken a yoga class. I was going to the gym and running. And I thought, this is like a blend of all the things I love, anatomy and mindset and personal coaching and helping people and physical movement. And so that really was the spark to light the flame of me changing the trajectory of my life. And after that class, it wasn't overnight, but it was probably within 2 to 3 years. I had quit my corporate career, sold my house, downsized to a condo in Boston, closer to the studio that I trained in, and I began teaching yoga. And that was over 20 years ago. So now, as you described in the intro, I've spent the better part of the past 20 years teaching yoga classes, public classes, but I also have a lot of specialty things that I do. I have had women's wellness groups. I've worked with children. I've worked in schools. And so my teaching has been really varied in terms of the different kinds of people that I teach yoga to. But additionally, because I love teaching anatomy and I love anatomy as a subject matter, I really developed an affinity for making anatomy easy to learn. And yoga teachers all can sort of relate to anatomy is hard to learn, but I know I need to know it. So that for me was a hole that I could fill, a gap that I could fill. And so years ago, I began training teachers on anatomy, and then I sort of created this blueprint this yoga anatomy blueprint. And that became sort of my branded teaching methodology that I've developed a pretty extensive program for. And I train teachers all over the world who want to build their confidence and their skill in teaching. And so a large part of what I do now is train teachers using my program, and I do a little teaching on the side.
That's great. What is it about yoga that really reached inside of you and grabbed you?
I think what it was is for me, it was this really beautiful amalgam of all these different things that I loved. And it wasn't unidimensional, it was very multidimensional. And I think the aspect of it for me that really hit me in my heart was how profound it was to be moving on a yoga mat without any other equipment or any other things that I needed, just me and my mind and my body and this yoga mat. And the actual moves we were doing had this really profound effect on how I felt both physically and mentally. And that was my personal experience. In addition, though, I knew it was a physical and sort of cognitive and psychosocial method that I really felt attracted to, and that was to provide to people. And that was after years of coaching people, doing not so much therapy, but as a rehab counselor, I was counseling people in different capacities. So I had a lot of experience in the clinical setting working with people with different physical and mental disabilities. And I saw yoga as a really amazing way to help people heal, help people grow, help people challenge themselves in healthy ways. And so I saw it both through my own experience as a practitioner, but also as a huge opportunity as a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I asked because there's sort of three specific things I really want to get into with you in this conversation. And one of them is that at perimenopause, menopause, this midlife transition time, the beginning of a new movement routine
Mm.
can be really challenging.
Yeah.
Right? At a time when we are feeling depleted and when we are feeling maybe overwhelmed, there's so many things that are happening at this time. And I always position it as it also is an incredible time to reconnect with your body. And yoga and that kind of movement, like you said, is a really brilliant tool for doing that reconnection with the body
Mm.
and getting back into it and really spending some time like feeling, where am I feeling tight? Where am I feeling like, where is the fear when I'm moving into, if I'm moving into a move? What are all of the things that are coming up? And so how do you support women, particularly like all humans and women at this stage in particular, who are struggling to get that movement routine going in their lives?
Mm. I think that the part that trips up a lot of people and definitely women. I mean, I'm 60, so I've gone through several different phases of perimenopause and being postmenopausal, so I can relate to this feeling of not being motivated maybe to start something new or to start something that maybe you have a perception is out of your reach or not doable or has to look a certain way. And what I typically, or not typically, but one of the things that comes up for me here is the idea of starting with anything. So it could be as simple as, and I think simple is always more accessible when we really make things simple for people. Because especially when we look at yoga, there's a lot of images that people see out there in the world, whether it's advertising or they walk by Aloe or Lululemon and have a certain perception, or they go to a yoga class and they look around the room and they might have a certain perception of themselves, comparing themselves to other people. So, the really interesting thing about yoga is even though we're doing physical movements, the work is really internal. And so it really doesn't matter what the movements are. So you could even lay out a yoga mat and lay on your back and just put one hand over your heart and one hand over your belly and take several deep breaths and just notice how you feel. That's yoga. And I can look at that through the lens of nervous system regulation. And I could say there's so much benefit to that simply because you're in silence, You're tapping into your body. So there's this introspective aspect to it. And the deep breathing has an effect on your parasympathetic nervous system. So it tends to settle your nerves, calm you down. Building that awareness is a huge part of building better health. Because typically, when we're not aware and even just physically moving, that's when things happen. Or when we're not aware and we're in reactive mode, that's when unpleasant things happen. So there's that. The other thing is, the poses themselves are just different ways to shape the body. So again, it doesn't need to be someone's perception of, oh, it has to be vigorous or it has to be heart pumping. It could be as simple as before I get out of bed in the morning, I take a really big stretch. I hug my knees into my chest. I rock my knees from side to side. I swing my legs over. I stand up and I do a couple of sweeping the arms up and bringing the arms down. That could be my yoga as I get started. And with these really small chunks of things, we can start almost like brick by brick, start to build a foundation. And, I call it when I work with people the magic of momentum. When you start to do something, even in small ways, you start to shift your relationship to whatever the thing is from, I didn't think I had time for this. I didn't think I could do it to, you know what? I am doing it. And now I want to do more. So that's one thing, one approach that I could offer to help people get started.
Thank you. And it's something that we talk a lot about in this show is those small doable moments. And yeah, and just whatever you are able to give to it is a really great place to start. And
Hmm.
it's not necessarily the commitment to a full hour-long class. If that feels too overwhelming for you, then start with those small moments because they really do make a difference. And I also wanted to circle back to what you were saying at the beginning about the perception, because when you and I first had a conversation, I had just come home from my yoga class. And one of the things that I am adjusting to, and it's highlighting for me an area that I need to continue to work on. And that was noticing that I am one of the oldest people in the room. And that is, it's a reality that is coming to into my sphere, more and more often. And it's really shifting the way I see myself. So I look out at all of these young, lithe bodies, and I am there to give that time and space to myself. That is my motivation. I do a number of other movement things as well that we're also going to talk about because it's important to talk about the balance of both things. But it's also really important to spend this time giving to our bodies in very specific ways. And when we're having those feelings light up in us around, like, ooh, I am the oldest body in this room, or I'm the largest body in this room, or I need the most modifications of anybody in this room, it can really highlight a number of emotions for us. And so
Mm.
I'm wondering about how you create those spaces that allow people to work through that emotion, because just taking ourselves out of it and being like, no, well, I just won't go. The universe is providing us this experience for a reason, right?
Mm.
So that we're doing some learning through it. So how do you create those spaces for people to work through that emotion?
So, in that kind of scenario, I mean, I think this is such a beautiful opportunity for us to reframe what's happening, right? And I run across this oftentimes when I'm working with yoga teachers who are in their late 40s and 50s and 60s, and they're teaching yoga classes and they're feeling similar to what you're describing because their students are in their 20s and 30s, is their assumption as they look out into the room. And they'll say to me, I don't feel like the students are going to be able to relate to me, or I don't feel like the students are going to like my class because I seem to be so much older than them. And even though it's not exactly what you're describing, the feelings they have are similar. That feeling like I'm comparing myself to the student, or in your case, comparing yourself to other people in class. So one of the things that I offer in this scenario or this conversation is sort of the reframe as it relates to, well, the first thing is, how do we know what anybody else in the room thinks about me? right? So we don't really know. We're assuming. And in most, if not all cases, everybody's really only thinking about them. They're usually not thinking about anybody else. And that sometimes it's not something we can prove. It's just that when we think about that, it sort of takes some of the pressure off that we put on ourselves, that we're walking in this room and everybody must be looking at me and judging me because they're assuming I'm much older than them, that kind of thing. The other thing, though, that I think about, and I talk about this with yoga teachers, is what if the other people in the room are looking at you and are inspired by you and look at you as an example of what's possible for them? And that sometimes can sort of not even take the pressure off, sort of give someone the motivation to continue because now I'm not a warning, I'm an example, right? Like one of my first yoga teachers used to say, "Do you want to be a warning or do you want to be an example?" Right? So here I'm an example. I'm a walking like when I go in at 60 years old to teach my yoga class, I'm a walking and talking example of whatever people might think when they look at me. And like I taught a yoga class recently, and one of the students was much older than the other folks. And after the class, she shared with me that she has a hip replacement. So I thought when I was watching her practice, I could tell that she was definitely working through some physical limitations, but she continued forward with the entire class. And then at the end of class, when she shared that with me, I was so inspired having known that I could visually tell that she was older than the other students. And additionally, she has a hip replacement and she's there. So that to me was a huge inspiration. So I share those different ways to frame things or to look at things as a way to give us an opportunity to see beyond the way we see things. Because oftentimes, the way we see things is shaped by our own limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves. And it's not to say that's bad. It's just to say, hey, I'm human. This is just how I'm feeling right now. But I wonder, is it possible for me to see that that might be something that if people are giving any energy to thinking about me, maybe they're thinking, wow, this is really amazing that this woman is here and I'm 20 and I might think of somebody at 60 as being super old, right? Like 20-year-olds probably think 60 is like so old.
Yeah.
And
Meanwhile, we know now it's a blink, right?
right. I mean, and when I sometimes get into conversations with yoga students, if something comes up about age, they'll be like, oh my God, you're 60 because their perception of 60 is
Yeah.
can't walk, like whatever it is. So again, I think it's a huge opportunity for that transference, for that to come through. That's not the primary thing, but I think it's helpful to talk about it because it can be the barrier for people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so having those mind frames to be able to think through can be really helpful because those are the things that I work myself through when I'm in that class and notice. I think one, nobody is looking at you, Lisa. Nobody else, nobody else cares. They're all here for their own reasons and for their own practice. And so that's number one. And then this morning I was thinking, thinking about Gabor Mate and his work around how we create our own experiences.
Yeah.
I thought I get to decide. I get to decide what my experience is here. And so I can decide that if people are looking at me, it is in that inspiration way of we can continue to move our bodies like this for the rest of our lives when we take the time, when we make this investment. And I get to decide that. I get to create my reality in this
Mhm.
place.
Mhm.
And so that has also been very
That's great.
helpful. Yeah. In making space where I actually feel good
Yeah.
about going into those spaces.
Yeah, totally. And it really is about you, like you creating the experience and you getting the benefit. And, if that other stuff happens to come up, if other people are looking and saying, wow, this is so inspiring, that's icing on the cake. The primary thing is I'm here for my own health. And this is an act of self love to be here and to take in this practice of whatever type of class it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this connects into one of the other things I hear a lot when I'm working with folks. And I will preface this by saying not all movement is for everyone. I agree. I hear that. And when I hear someone say, "Oh, I hate yoga. It's too slow. I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of it." I'm curious what your response is when
Mm,
someone says that to you. What's the first thing that you respond
yeah.
with?
So I would say, well, what do you want to get out of what do you want to get out of exercise?
Mhm.
Because, I could certainly have a conversation with you about yoga as it relates to women in menopause and the need to do resistance training. And
Yes.
we could definitely have a very intelligent conversation about the importance of resistance training and that yoga really does not replace that. Even though you're weight bearing on your arms, doesn't replace it. However, there is a place if we want as an individual, if I want there to be a place for yoga, I can definitely speak to a lot of the benefits of yoga. I think that particular type of person that's saying that, I would say, well, what benefits are you looking for? What are you looking to get out of something? And that would be how I would respond to that. I mean, I think in the context of women in perimenopause and menopause, there is a lot to the idea of having a portfolio of things that you do. And I definitely will say when I started practicing yoga in 1999 and even into the early 2000s, the narrative was this is all you need. And so as I got more into practicing yoga and teaching yoga, from a branding perspective, that was what a lot of the teachers who were established at the time, a lot of the verbiage was around yoga is all you need, yoga every day, yoga detoxes you, all this stuff that's really not grounded in science as we know it today. And so that is not what I espouse as a method for women. I will also say that there are people who, of course, don't like yoga, and that is totally okay. Keep in mind, though, if we take the word yoga out of it, if you do any kind of stretching before a run, or any kind of stretching before a Zumba class, or any kind of cool down after a Pilates class or something, it's probably yoga. So, the people who are saying, I don't like to do yoga, blah, 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 are probably doing some of it and just don't recognize it as such. And then the last thing I'll say is there's so many different styles of yoga. And now there's even yoga with weights, different hybrids. So there are a lot of different kinds. So somebody that says that, it might just be a matter of finding a match for them.
Absolutely. What the question I always wanna ask as well is, and what are you try what
Mm. Yeah.
right? What is it that comes up when
Yeah.
you are
Thank you.
practicing, right? When you have given yourself that space where we're not counting reps, where we're not like we're actually giving our brain some space
Yeah.
to be free and go where it needs to go and do that somatic reconnection to the body because when we are in not that when we're lifting, we're not being intentional about our movement. We absolutely are. But this
Mhm.
is a very different kind of movement. And so I often wonder that as well. And that what is it that what is making you uncomfortable? And absolutely it can be challenging, but it also is time to sit with those things that are hard.
Yeah, a lot of times people will say, "Well, I don't want to do yoga because I don't like to meditate," or it's too, like you said, it's too slow. And so they connect the word yoga with a lot of the philosophical meaning behind yoga. And, we can sort of, not to dilute the importance and the historical significance of yoga, we can look at it though in different ways if we want to do that as a way to attract different people. The other thing I'll say though about what you were just referencing is there is sometimes when people react that way an avoidance. And it reminds me of there was a student one time after I taught my class, she called me over and she was probably, I don't know, in her 40s or so. And she kind of sheepishly said to me, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And she said, when you were saying contract the core, I don't feel that. I don't feel my core. And I said, okay. And so she was sitting on the yoga mat. So I sort of sat beside her and we got into a conversation. And she had had a couple of abdominal surgeries in her life. And So, from a physical perspective, she had a lot of pretty invasive medical procedures, which definitely affected the quality of her fascia and her muscles and her ability muscularly to contract the muscles in the core, the four main muscles. But there was also a somatic aspect to it that she had sort of disconnected from that part of her body. And that speaks to this idea of what are you avoiding? There not only what are you avoiding, but what's possible, right? So for this person, going to yoga classes and hearing cues and trying to assimilate them into her body. And then in her willingness and her curiosity to ask me that question was opening the door for her to reconnect, not just physically with her muscles in her core, but also just feeling more complete as a human,
Yeah.
right? So this is the kind of thing when we were talking earlier about my experience when I took my first yoga class, this is the kind of thing that I was talking.
Yeah, because you bring forward why it also is so important to approach everyone in a trauma-informed way. Like, I wouldn't just come out and say to somebody, "What are you avoiding?" If I didn't know them and didn't have a good relationship with them. That's not the way I would approach it, because we do hold trauma. We hold experiences in our fascia, right? In different aspects of our body. And when we think about this perimenopausal menopausal shift, a lot of that has been held in our hip and pelvic area, right? And there's so much shift that's happening there. And when we start moving in ways that physically open up those areas in the body, I can speak for myself. I know when I opened up a space in my body physically, and then energy starts to flow in it, and tears will start to flow as well
Mm.
often. And so it's being prepared, I think, also for and being really informed around what happens when we do start moving our bodies in ways that allow energy to flow that perhaps has been really contained for a long time. And I think that story you shared about the woman with the abdominal surgery is a really powerful example of.
Yeah. I mean, think about, and maybe for the listener who isn't, connecting to sort of the esoteric conversation about energy, just think of it in the context of when you're stressed, you might make a fist or you might hunch. When you're depressed or feeling a lack of self esteem, you might close off the front of your body. So there's this relationship between how we feel and how we organize our body from a musculoskeletal standpoint, postural standpoint. And that sort of lays the groundwork for the longer we have certain quote unquote negative feelings or troubling feelings, the more we might hold our body in a particular way. Now, does that mean that literally the feeling is in our body? I don't know, but it definitely does suggest that the posture we have is oftentimes a sign of how we feel. I mean, there's a whole Amy Cuddy TED talk on power posing on YouTube. It's like one of the most watched TED talks out there. And the whole concept that she studied at Harvard is how power posing affects the endocrine system and the release of testosterone and other hormones. And so the whole idea of going to a yoga class and shaping the body in different ways and having these feelings of release, we can even just look at it through the lens of the muscles and the fascia and just look at it from the point of view of, oh, when I'm hunching, my pecs are contracted, but when I'm sitting up straight, my pecs are stretching. And so that postural change helps me breathe easier, helps me stretch muscles that normally are overly shortened. So I just offer that as another or as an additional way to speak to what you describe, which lives in sort of the energetic realm. And it also sort of gives people an idea of, hey, if you do go to a yoga class and do experience sort of a rush of emotion, it doesn't need to be a scary thing. You could look at it through the lens of, hey, maybe you're just stretching some muscles that over time you've created a habit of holding your body in a particular way. And these muscles have really shortened and now they're lengthening. And maybe that gives you more space in your chest cavity and you can breathe better. I just offer that as a way for people to, keep an open mind when those things happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And when I also wanted to circle back to that conversation around pairing resistance training
Mm.
with yoga. Because another conversation I have a lot is, well, can I just do yoga? It's always, can I just, in trying to avoid resistance training, which I understand, right? We have had decades of programming that resistance training is not for us, right? That will make us bulky. We have all of these from our diet culture, these upbringing, we internalize all of that.
Yeah.
So there is no blame or shame in this conversation. There are lots of reasons why people hold those ideas. And it's so important that we absolutely do resistance training and then move our bodies in other ways as well. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. And I'll add to that. I mean, yes, to what you said. And also, when we say move our bodies, this is sort of the anatomy part of me speaking, the anatomy educator part of me speaking, moving our bodies in different planes of motion. I mean, one really problematic thing for humans is we're moving in the sagittal plane a lot, which is basically the front to back plane, the moving forward or backward plane. We're running, we're walking. In those directions, we're moving forward. Our limbs are moving forward and obviously backward as our leg goes back. The movement we don't do nearly enough of is lateral movement and rotational movement. And so when we look at what I described earlier as a portfolio of activities to keep ourselves healthy, within those activities, we want to look for ways we can move in that side to side plane. And that could be as simple as for 15 to 20-minute a day or 15 to 20-minute 3 times a week resistance training piece, I'm going to include lateral lunges. I'm going to include lateral lunges with hand weights. I'm going to include side bounding, type of thing. So that is in there. Now, certainly the cool thing about yoga is a 20-minute yoga practice with a bunch of poses is automatically going to take you into a bunch of different planes, frontal, sagittal, transverse, and work a whole bunch of muscles in a bunch of different ways. Some are stretching, some are strengthening, right? The shortening or the lengthening. So again, for the person who's resistant to yoga, think about it in terms of return on investment for your time. You could do 20 minutes of yoga and knock out from a physical exercise standpoint, moving in multiple planes, strengthening, weight bearing, balancing, and lengthening. So you really, from a return on investment standpoint, get a huge bang for your time when you do yoga practice. And then the last thing I'll say is, I agree with you. No, you can't just do yoga. I mean, I think that is the reality. But the cool thing is, because a variety is more what makes sense for women as we age, it gives you variety. So you don't tend to get bored with doing the same thing over and over again. And the other thing is, it doesn't mean 5 hours a day.
That's right.
It could literally be 20 minutes of yoga, 10 minutes of weights, 5 minutes of deep breathing or meditate. Like, I don't want to go through all the things, but even if we just say go for a walk, couple of 20 minutes of yoga, 15 minutes of resistance training, that in and of itself might be a good foundation to build on.
Yeah, absolutely. And those really small doable moments. And the other thing is making sure that we have access points for everybody. And if you are someone who has been perhaps sedentary for a long time,
Mhm.
even all of those little pieces can feel overwhelming.
Yep.
So there's no part of me that says like, well, just don't do anything. If that's where you're at, start with something.
Yes. Yes.
Start with something that feels good in your body and that feels doable and that actually enjoy and that there is some joy in it,
Yes.
because that's what will keep bringing you back to continue building a practice and then adding in other elements of practices as well as you start building that flexibility, strength,
Yep.
vitality in the body again.
Yeah, I find one of the cool techniques that helps me, and I actually recently went through a stage where for about 3 weeks, maybe even a month, I was really having a hard time lifting weights. And even though I have this room here, that's my yoga studio slash we have weights in here. It still became a thing where I just got into this mode where I was getting back into running since it was nice outside and I just wasn't making time. So what I started to do is I went back to one of my old techniques of habit stacking. So I would put on a podcast and do some resistance training. Or now that it's summer, there's a bunch of different like sporting things on TV between Wimbledon and the US Open and Tour de France. And, so I'll put the TV on and I'll watch a little tennis and I'll be doing the weights with it. Or sometimes I would watch like Jeopardy at night and I would trigger in my mind, oh, instead of cleaning up from dinner and watching Jeopardy, I'll go up to the weight room and I'll do, because Jeopardy's like 22 minutes minus the commercials. And I get that done and I get to, keep my brain healthy by trying to guess the answers. So I would say habit stacking can be a way. I mean, the typical one is go for a walk, listen to a podcast, go for a run, listen to a podcast. But there's other things you could connect up with, doing something that you feel resistance around doing, pair it up with something that you don't, and then that helps get you going. And once you get going, like we said earlier, momentum, like now that I've used that habit last month, now I'm back on track. Every day I do 15 to 20 minutes and I'm back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ones I share is brush your teeth and do 10 squats,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. E yeah. It can be super simple and things that we can implement really easily in our day. Just yeah, to wrap up our conversation, I do want to because we've used the word fascia a number of times in this conversation, and it's a word that we hear more frequently now. And I want to make sure that everyone knows exactly what that is, what it does for us, and how yoga can help support that system.
Sure. So I'll start out with like something that's probably relatable. If you've ever heard Eva Longoria do a L'Oreal moisturizer commercial and she talks about hyaluronic acid, right? Like that's a word that gets thrown around in commercials about moisturizer and moisturizer that goes on your face and you don't want wrinkles on your face or whatever the messaging is around that. Hyaluron is a component of fascia. So I just wanted to throw that out just so people, when they hear that commercial now, they can say, oh, that's a fascia thing. So basically, when we think about what the body's made of, the thing that most people think about is the bones, right? Mr. Bones behind me. So the bones, and then muscles, and then other things like tendons and ligaments. And the tendons and ligaments fall into a bucket of things that, from a heading perspective, are connective tissue structures. Bones are bones, muscles are muscles. But there's a whole other part of the body. Like almost think of it like you lift the hood of your car and you're like, oh, there's the carburetor. There's a whole other part of your body, which is fascia, Fascia. And fascia is actually, it's like a whole other organ, like your liver or your heart. Matter of fact, when I went to Cadaver Lab a couple years back, we took the fascia out of the body as an entire structure, which is very painstaking to do, but it's possible. So what fascia is it's under that category of connective tissue, but it's really its own kind. It's not muscle, it's not bone. It's a network of fibers, collagen fibers, as well as a viscous type liquid, like a thick, like molasses type liquid. And within that liquid is the hyaluron. And the fascia itself is part of what keeps our body in its structure. It's both strong and flexible and gives us buoyancy. When you think about where it is, I sometimes describe it as like a Spider-Man suit. So, of course, you've got your skin that you can pinch. Under your skin, you have a layer of adipose tissue. Under that, you have a layer of superficial fascia. Then you have a layer of deep fascia. Then you get to muscle. So, in that example I gave of the woman who chatted with me in yoga class and she had had a number of surgeries in her abdomen, or even if you've ever had your appendix out and they couldn't do it laparoscopically, they had to do an urgent removal. You cut through all those layers to get to something. So that's why after surgery, you have a couple of weeks where you're having a hard time moving around because they cut through all those layers. As we move our bodies, the collagen fibers in the fascia can sometimes get disrupted. And when we were talking earlier about when you hold your body in a particular way, maybe related to how you feel or how you've been feeling, those fibers can sort of congeal in a way, sort of like hold a particular pattern. And when you get a massage or use a foam roller or use a Theragun or use a myofascial release ball. The whole point of that is to try to restore the fibers in the fascia to their normal wavy pattern and to get that fluid moving through so that there's better what we call slide and glide between the layers. Think of the layers like lasagna. Like if you cut into a piece of lasagna, you see those are the layers, and you want slide and glide. When you don't have slide and glide, you have stuck. And that's why when I teach a yoga class, if I see somebody lift their arm and they can't get their arm all the way up, I think, could be fascia, could be muscle. Who knows? The good news is we're doing yoga. It's going to get to it all. Same with get a massage, use a foam roller, use a myofascial release ball. You're going to be working all that stuff. So that's what fascia is.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's something that's so important for all of us to understand because it's neglected, right?
Yes.
So often it is neglected, and it's such a key part of making sure that we maintain our long-term mobility. And so
Yes.
having that understanding is really important.
Yes. I would say go on Amazon, buy 2 myofascial release balls, and I would say just there's tons of stuff on YouTube for how to use them. It's a self, just like brushing your teeth. It's a good thing to have either a Theragun or 2 myofascial release balls, like right by your bed. Even just roll the bottoms of your feet. That can really, like, your feet can transform your whole body if you keep your feet and the muscles in your feet active and keep your arches active. So even just rolling the bottom of your feet can be transformative. I have a wicker basket by my TV downstairs in the living room with myofascial release balls and foam rollers and stuff. So when I watch TV, I just have the basket there and I just do a little self-care.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder. I keep mine in my bedside table, but I tend to only pull them out when I'm in crisis. When I'm like, "Whoop, so the back is really unhappy. Let's get you out." So that was such a good reminder of the daily practice of that.
Yeah.
So thank
And
you very
also
much.
buy the grip strength thing because it's really
Yeah,
important as women age to test their grip strength and just to work the grip. Your
yeah,
grip strength is actually an indicator of your overall strength and health in your body. So buy one of those grip strength things and put that in the basket too. You're
yeah.
watching TV anyway. You can just
Smart. That's great. And finally, what is bringing you joy right now?
What is bringing me joy right now? I would say, I have the opportunity to work with women one on one in my program, and I am endlessly inspired by the transformations that they make. I'm currently working with a couple of women who are definitely in their 40s and 50s, and they're getting into taking on more yoga classes as a way to shift how they see themselves in terms of their role and their purpose. One woman has older kids now, so she's building up her schedule and sees that being a path for her in kind of the next stage of her life. Another woman has left a nursing career and she already is teaching a number of classes. These are both women who are teaching specialty type things for cancer patients and things like that. So the opportunity I have to get on Zoom calls with them, really coach them, and a lot of it is the mindset work that involves really loosening attachments to certain perceptions that they have of themselves and what's possible, and at the same time having this attraction and this vision for what they want to do in this next phase of their life. But for these limiting beliefs, they're not sure how to get there, and so our work together is really around just really doable, easy experiments that they can do in service to loosening their attachments to these beliefs. And the follow up calls I have with them are just so cool to see when they come back and they go, wow, that worked. And I'm feeling so much more confident and I'm really seeing what's possible. Or I took on this new class, or that for me is just so inspiring to see. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all your wisdom and your experience with us today, Karen. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. All of your contact information will be in the show notes.
Yep.
And what is one easy way for someone to connect with you?
I would say the best way is my website is barebonesyoga.com, and I'm always on Instagram, which is barebones yoga. And the last thing I'll say is I'll share a link with you to a free confidence building self guided experience if people want to take the 5-day confidence challenge. It's a really fun exercise to help build your confidence. So I'll share that link with you as well.
That's great. And I will make sure that that's in the show notes for everyone to be able to access. So thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this week's episode of Transforming 45. I hope you feel inspired, empowered, and ready to embrace every facet of your midlife journey. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. These actions make a world of difference in growing our podcast community. Your support helps us reach much more amazing listeners just like you. And don't forget, please share an episode you love with a friend or with your community. Sharing our stories is what helps our community grow. Keep shining your midlife magic, and I'll catch you next week.
Electricast.